care of some important business. Today's SHAC meeting was originally scheduled for April the 26th, and due to a lot of scheduling conflicts had to be rescheduled to tonight. So thank you all for joining us and being available. Also apologies for the delay. We were having some technical difficulties. So I am glad that we're here now, and want to make sure that we go ahead and just start off with making sure that we have an account of everybody who is present with us today. There is one note that I just wanted to make sure all of our members are aware of, that we do have some members that will be coming up on their term as we're concluding the end of the SHAC year. And so making sure that you let us know, or your trustee know, that you're interested in serving again if you are, just so that the board is aware of any additional nominations or recommendations to the SHAC to get a full SHAC, because we need everybody. An email went out that had the list with terms, so everybody should have gotten that. If you need it again, we can send it out again just to make sure that we looked at that. But just to make sure we do an official roll call, just wanted to say, I know on iPhone we have Melissa, who is gonna keep video off. We're traveling, so I wanted to account for Melissa there. I see Michael Oda, Nian Dunn. I see Katie Kirish. I see Robin Honig. We have Emily O'Neill, Leslie Winters. I also see Supriya Nadu Ferris, Cornell Woodridge, Dr. Jennifer Faulkner, Becky Laswell, Kayla Thompson. We have Dr. Amy Grosso, Randy Hafner, Gina Norton, Denise Ray, Kelly Darby, Dr. Monica Faulkner, myself, Ami Usselman, Hillary Sederquist. We have Ryan Smith. Who else have I missed? Is there anybody that I've missed? You didn't hear me call your name?
So tonight,
Judge Jones, I can barely hear you because it's my phone, but I'm not sure if you said the Melissa's on the iPhone from our.
You did. I said Melissa first. You were
okay,
first.
thank you. Yep,
Before I forgot.
You're tiny in my ear. Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
Carla Amaker, District Administration.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for being here. So just wanted to make sure that
and Dr. Metcher, sorry.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead and say that again.
Travis Smutcher. I'm one of the other area soups.
Thank you. I just am used to making sure we're not talking over each other for a clear record. I know we're not on a record, but we are live streaming, and I want to make sure that everybody who is watching is able to hear that as well. So then we needed to make sure that we approved our February 15th SHAC meeting minutes, and that went out through email as well. So I just wanted to first open up. Was there any corrections that needed to be made? Did anybody identify anything on the minutes from February? All right. So we will, let me turn it over. Hillary, did you want to take the vote on approving the minutes?
Once I found my unmute button. Okay. Do we improve the minutes? I will scroll.
You have a motion to approve. I'll take that from Michael.
I see the motion.
All right.
Second. Okay. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Speak now, forever hold your peace.
I think we're all in favor.
Okay.
Anyone opposed?
Everybody's in favor. Okay.
All right. All right. And
you're also welcome to give corrections too. People have.
Yes. And so then, Ryan, I know we were hoping to be able to do a short presentation. Were we able to get somebody to do that?
Yeah, you got me tonight. And as well as, that's why I asked Dr. Amaker and Dr. Mutcher to join me as well, just to be able to answer some questions. But we did have a request just to share how we work with staff on appropriate social media use, whether we're talking about social media with student to teacher, teacher to teacher, just how, and it's not just teachers, any staff member in the organization, some of the expectations around different ways that we you present yourself or anything like that online. So I did prepare just a few slides. So I'll share my screen. I'll put a link to it in the agenda as well if you want to follow along. Like I said, it'll be pretty short, but if we got time for questions and answers, and that's why I asked Dr. Amaker and Mutcher to join me tonight, just answering the questions that we may have. Here is a link in the chat, and I'm going to share my screen. All right, can everybody see my screen now?
Mhm.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so like I said, just gonna go over a few of the basics. It's pretty, some of it's standardized across the state of Texas with an ethics course that all teachers at one point during their career have to finish and take with us. This is something we do annually with all new staff. And then a lot of that training as well happens throughout the year as we work with new staff members and existing staff members. And of course, it's constantly a moving target, as we all know, as different ways of communication continue to evolve in our society. But like I said, wanted to share some high level ways that we work with staff on this throughout the year. Really the backbone of really everything we do with training new staff as they come on how to appropriately interact, like I said, with each other as well as with students, is really through a TEA training that was developed a few years ago. It covers a wide range of ethical situations, but a significant portion of that is around communication. And I wanted to just pull out a few of the slides from that to talk about tonight. There's a link on this slide right here. It's publicly available on the entire ethics training. So if you click on that TEA resources link on there, you can go through all of it if you like to get a sense of kind of that standardized training that staff receives across the state. The big thing that we really work with staff on, though, is that understanding that as a public school teacher, principal, central office, bus driver, everybody, you're considered a role model both inside and outside the classroom. So sometimes when there are situations that we do need to address, oftentimes there's a disconnect with what a staff member may be doing online that they don't think is really related at all to their work. But as a public school person, oftentimes that does influence your ability to do your work. So that's something that we always have to remind ourselves on, is that we are constantly seen as that public school employee. So just a few things from the ethics training I want to talk about. Here's a couple of slides I pulled out. Obviously, transparency is important, being transparent, maintaining that openness and visibility and accountability of what you're posting, knowing that you can't always control who sees what, who screenshots what. And always, like I said, representing and being aware that whatever our staff members do post online, they're not only representing themselves, they also do represent our organization as a whole. And also a key piece that we want everybody to remember that, as a public school, most of what we do, is accessible as a matter of record. Open records requests are pretty routine in Round Rock. So there are a lot of open records requests that come in. And a lot of times we don't remember that everything that we do is basically publicly available. So that's something that we work with our staff on quite a bit to remember that. A few other, so that's really just the ethics training anyway. The ethics training, like I said, it's for the entire state. So it is pretty high level. And it also goes through a great deal of other modules that pertain to things outside of general social media use. But where we get into more specifics with staff is in our staff handbook. So I did also pull out a few elements of that as well. Our staff handbook is also available for the public, for anybody to see. So that I added a link to it in the slides as well. So if anybody wants to do a deep dive, it's rather long, but we go through it with staff each year. It's part of the annual compliance training, and I know on campus and in departments we also spend time talking with our staff members about any changes, and especially around some of the elements that continue to evolve as communication styles and communication modalities do continue to change. But a few things that we do talk about often is maintaining confidentiality. in all matters relating to students and coworkers. I don't think it's a secret that we're living more and more of our lives online and communicating a lot more in different types of social media and different types of online spaces. And maintaining that confidentiality between coworkers is something that we do work with our staff on quite a bit. And also working with them on when they do have concerns, complaints, or criticisms, that they're sharing those through appropriate channels. So I know, like with my staff, I'm constantly working with them that if we do hear about somebody who has some concerns, we always want to bring them in and talk to them face to face, help them talk through any of the concerns that they may have. It's not to say that you can't post, your opinions and things like that, but it's just something that we try to help staff be more mindful of than we sometimes are in the heat of the moment. So this is just a pullout from our staff handbook. Another piece is remembering that as, like I said, public school employees, we're always role models, whether we work directly with students or not, that we're always responsible for our public conduct, even when we're not acting as district employees. So it's always a gray area of when you're no longer a district employee and when you are out in the community. And again, one of the key elements that we do work with our staffs on quite a bit is that as soon as something that, as same goes with students, as soon as something that you may have done out in the community or said online or posted online, if it's an image or anything like that, as soon as that becomes a detriment to you for your ability to do your job, effectively perform your job, then our teams essentially work with that employee on dealing with that in a variety of ways. So that's a piece, that's a big indicator. It's a little vague sometimes, but when something becomes to the extent that it's affecting your ability to do your job, but that's a key piece that we work with staff on. Another piece that we work specifically really with teachers when they're working with or communicating with students is that all that communication really has to be within the scope of your employee responsibility. So as soon as any kind of online communication veers away from something that has to do with your clear defined role as an employee, there could be some issues there. And then a key thing that we did add to the staff handbook just a few years ago, once it started to become a need, is that we recognize that our students, parents, everybody do a lot of their communication through social media platforms. So we wanted to create a pathway for staff to be able to do that away from their own private accounts. So we work with our teams on how if they want to use different social medias, how they can set up a professional account, a professional page that then they can use that to communicate with both parents and students, and sometimes even with each other. So, like I said, that was pretty high level. We do have, we're a large organization, so different situations come up throughout the year. Sometimes, we might have a staff member post something about another staff member that one staff member or the other has an issue with, and then that is something that then we have to, bring everybody in and mediate and make sure that there's no clear harassment going on or anything like that. And most of the time, once you get people together, you can talk it through. But that is something that comes up from time to time, not often, but it is something that's new in the last decade. That more online communication has become a part of our daily lives. So like I said, a lot of this is gone over with staff at the beginning of every year, more so with our new hires, because a lot of them are younger and they've lived in this world longer than we have. So they sometimes have a harder time differentiating between personal social media use and then social media use that's professional. So we definitely do spend a lot of time working with all of them. So like I said, that's real high level, but we could answer any questions that anybody might have. And that's why I asked Dr. Emaker and Mutcher to join us as well, because they work more with our campuses on that element.
Thank you. So Kelly, it looks like you have a question. Go right ahead.
Thanks. I have a couple of questions. The slide number 6 from the from the handbook, did you say that was recently put in there? When was that added?
About creating a professional account?
Mm-hmm.
I believe that's what I meant. I'd have to go back and look. I can get you that information. I think it was pre-pandemic, definitely, but I'm not sure exactly which year. But it's been it was a need, that popped up. I want to say 4 or 5 years ago when we added that.
It was like something that kind of y'all were just kind of observing some issues and decided it'd be a good idea to do that.
I think we observed that staff were using their own personal accounts and there was a mixing of worlds, right? We wanted to work with folks so they could use that modality to communicate, but have a professional presence, and also a presence that's viewable by their supervisor, essentially.
How is it monitored? Like compliance with these rules?
I'd say the first piece, and anybody else with thoughts on that, feel free to jump in as well. But I believe that we work with most staff to their expectations. They let their supervisor know when they have those pages, and that I don't think it's monitored on a daily basis. But that's the expectation, that if you are communicating with students, you're using one of those pages.
Okay. And so there's like not any situations or certain types of employees where it would be even like considered within the scope of their work to try to like engage sort of incognito with kids on social media? Does that make sense, the way I'm asking the question?
I can't imagine a scenario where that would be appropriate.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Jennifer Faulkner.
Thank you. Kind of piggybacking on that, I'm wondering if there's guidance for when parents should be included or copied on communication. I know that's very common in the sports world for safe sports. That, I'm constantly copied on text messaging if my daughter would be involved. So I'm kind of curious when the parents are guided to be in that loop of communication. I realize you can't do it exhaustively, but what do you have in place?
We do. We have a policy as well. I didn't go too deep into the text messaging policy, but there's a whole nother section of the staff handbook that directly addresses text messaging. And with that, I believe the policy there is that parents are included in all messaging that happens, and as well as I believe as well as the supervisor of that staff member.
And Michael?
Thank you. When you say staff, does that include the Round Rock Police Department, school ISD Police Department?
I'm making an assumption, but I assume they're Round Rock ISD staff members. So I'd have to dive deeper. I don't know if Carla or Travis, you know that specifically, but I would assume so. But I'd have to, before I say something wrong, I'd want to double check on that.
I mean, if there were a purpose and an intention for them to have a social media presence with a student group that they were working with, and parents were invited to be a part of that as well, I could see that could be something that happened, but not from a personal standpoint, but in a professional capacity, yes.
But they all are also law enforcement that have licensure separate and apart from the school, right? So there may be some other governing bodies on how law enforcement would engage with students. Is that kind of what y'all would think?
That sounds right. But I can get more information on that. Get back to everybody.
All right, Dr. Jennifer Faulkner, I saw your hand go up again.
Yeah, I had another question. In the ethics training, do you give any guidance when district personnel may be on social media in terms of creating alternate accounts so they can speak more freely? Seems to be becoming more common that people are creating some of these pseudo accounts to be anonymous, but hiding behind that allows, some engagement to probably go a little further. So I'm just curious if you have anything in training that addresses that at all.
So I doubt that's in the TEA training. And I don't believe that's addressed specifically. That could be something that's addressed in the future, but I don't think currently there is any kind of rules or anything around creating anonymous accounts.
Yeah, there's definitely not anything in the TEA ethics training. I know that there's not currently anything that I know of about pseudo accounts. It would be something that, if it were brought to us and we were able to determine that that's, who created that account and that they were acting out of our standards of professionalism, then that would be something that we would investigate further. But I know the one from the state for sure does not talk about pseudo accounts.
All right, Kelly, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, Ryan, when you come back with more information about, how Round Rock PD might have different standards, could you make sure to copy me? Because I have some specific questions. And one of the things that I would really be interested in understanding is if the, obviously how they conflict with the standards for Round Rock ISD specifically. So like if there's any permissions that an officer might have that sort of put them outside of the scope of the TEA's guidance and would then make it more challenging for a school to discipline or investigate misconduct.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get and I'll share that with everybody. We'll get their policies and practices and see where there's any kind of differences.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
And Cornell?
Thank you. I was just curious, as far as, you often see people who may hold, positions of importance, or they may be connected to a larger, body or organization, say on their profiles, these thoughts and whatnot are my own and do not reflect, the opinion of such and such and such. Is there any discussion about statements like that on the profile as far as how teachers interact with the public, just so there is kind of, the inability for them to say, hey, I'm making this clear, this is all me personally, this is not, the district or whatnot speaking through me, these are all my personal thoughts.
I do see that especially I see that on Twitter a lot, that teachers put that comment, in their bio, but our stance is clear. And I'll just read from it, and Ryan has mentioned this: employees are responsible for the public conduct, even when they are not acting as district employees. So I think, even if they put a little disclaimer statement on that, I would still say that what they post is a reflection of their public persona, and they and they are always like an employee. Like you can't live in two different worlds when you're a public educator. So although they might put that statement on there, and I'm certainly not from the legal team, I would say it doesn't excuse them from bad behavior when we have a really clear guidance that they are responsible for their conduct, even when they're not acting in the capacity as a district employee.
So I totally understand that. I was also just kind of taking this a little bit further.
Yeah.
Is there anything that's covered, and maybe it's not in this training because I know it's specifically for staff, is there anything covered in any kind of training around social media from the parent side? Just because we've certainly seen more parents being very active, very vocal in ways that may or may not be, professional or civil. And so I just wasn't sure if there was maybe even any protection for staff from from parents with the district who are deciding for a number of reasons to kind of come after them, regardless of how they are kind of being online. I just wasn't sure if there's any kind of coverage or discussion about that as far as the training goes.
I haven't seen us provide such guidance. Honestly, I've had it happen to me, so I think it's a wonderful idea.
Right.
I mean,
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a very, I'm sure it's a relatively new kind of phenomenon, especially over the last year or two, with some parents being definitely much more aggressive and really more coming after district employees. So yeah, I just wasn't sure if that's something that the district has considered as far as further guidance, because I completely appreciate there needing to be those standards for teachers, even if they're away from campus. And it gets to be, I'm sure, really tricky when you do have parents from the district who, may be egging you on or coming after you. And I definitely feel like there needs to be some kind of standard those ways. I know there's employee and obviously family, but still definitely, I'm sure really, really tricky area to navigate without any kind of clear guidance to protect you, if you will.
Yeah.
I
I
think
think
this is a great time. I just wanted to pivot a little bit because I heard the response was we haven't really seen this. And I know, Cornell, you're saying like, yeah, we're in unprecedented situations where social media is becoming more and more of a tool and a way that people can make sure that their voice is heard. And I think this is a great time. I wanted to take a moment because I did put in the agenda, and a link to our agenda is in the chat. And I wanted to kind of jump to the bottom of our agenda to make sure that we talked about this and didn't overlook it when we get to our really important business that we have today. I mentioned earlier that those who are looking to recommit to the SHAC to be able to, we have the link in the agenda, fill out the volunteer application for the SHAC so that your trustee will know and we can share that information. What I wanted to highlight is that as we had this discussion and we talk about, hearing that even teachers putting a disclaimer or any staff putting a disclaimer may not be the end all be all to absolve them of being able to say whatever they want to from the district perspective. It sounds like that there's still some accountability and some responsibility. And I think that's just what comes with responsibility and the roles that we have. Our teachers are, in my eyes, community leaders. They are in a very beautiful position to help me raise my children, and I love it. And I think that is, I mean, not to borrow from Spider-Man, but with, great power comes great responsibility. And I think that's where we're at. And as I talk about us committing and recommitting to the SHAC for those of us who will, and those of us whose terms haven't expired, and those who are interested in a leadership position on the SHAC, which I want to mention also, I wanted to just reiterate, and I put it in the agenda, the purpose of the SHAC. And the purpose of the SHAC is to promote sound school policies and practices that will improve and maintain the health and wellness of its students, faculty, and community members. And to me, that's very important because that means we all also have an additional responsibility to our community because we are community leaders, especially in this Round Rock ISD community, which means in what we do and how we behave and how we act in the public, disclaimer or not, if you are on the SHAC, that responsibility of embodying the purpose of the SHAC, promoting and improving to maintain the health and wellness of students, faculty, and community members. So each other, our students, our staff, and making sure that we are embodying why we're on the SHAC. And I reiterate that at this time because this is the time to recommit to the SHAC and recommit to that purpose. And if that is not in your heart a purpose or a responsibility that you want to carry, then to reflect on that and whether this role makes sense for you. I know a lot of people have interest, and I think we have a great power and responsibility, but it is limited, right? Because we only give recommendations. We're not a rule-making body, but we are about to get to our most important work, which is voting on the recommendations that we want to provide to the board. And so I just wanted to take some time to really give honor to the purpose that we have and the great responsibility that we have, and just make sure everybody remembers what comes with that. And so with that, I also wanted to say that we do have a bit of a leadership in the SHAC. We have a chair role, vice chair, and secretary. And I have asked for any nominations for any of those positions. If you could just send those to me by May the 13th. We do have a called meeting on May the 17th, and it's going to be a short meeting, but we need to go over the presentation that we're going to give to the board about the recommendations we decide on. And we are also going to vote on those leadership positions. I know everybody is always interested in knowing the people who currently hold those positions and what their plans are. I will speak first, and I'll let Kelly and Hillary also speak for themselves. I am happy to be in a support role if anybody is very interested in being chair. My term does not expire. I will be here. I am not going anywhere, but I definitely believe in sharing responsibility. But again, if nobody is interested, I'm happy to do it as well. So I'm here if needed, but I'm happy to support somebody else who would love an opportunity to be in the chair role. I'm going to let Kelly, can you tell us where you're at as far as vice chair?
This has been a really cool year for me, and I've had a really good time learning from everybody and listening. Having said that, have decided that I'm not going to be able to continue serving on SHAC, and I am sad about that, but also I have a lot of other things, projects that I'm trying to pursue, and I will always be around to support if anybody needs anything. But honestly, I feel a little bit not as up to the task as most of you guys are. Most of y'all are just so like informed about the district and just so like, I don't know, engaged in everything. And it's just so cool. It's been really cool to work with you all and learn from you. So thank you for that experience.
Thank you, Kelly. And I know we've all appreciated having you here. So yeah, I have your phone number, so you won't be far from me. And Hillary, for yourself as secretary, if you want to share with the membership.
Okay, hopefully you all can hear me well because my
I can
screen's
hear you now.
freezing a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So my term is up, and I haven't actually decided yet if I would be able to serve another term yet or not. I know I need to decide that soon, so that a decision might be made for me. Ultimately, somebody else might be taking my place. So I'm on the fence still, but it's been great serving. So definitely somebody else can take the secretary position since I am undecided.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all your diligent work. The minutes have been wonderful. Thank you so much. And so I wanted to give the kind of executive officer positions an opportunity just to share with the rest of the SHAC kind of where everybody is at. And it sounds like any position is available for anybody who's really interested, and you will have some support with that. So please just let me know if you're interested in any of the positions by May the 13th, so I can have those names. I'll still call from the floor if anybody else wants to nominate somebody at the meeting that we have called for May 17th, but that's going to be one of the main items of business for May the 17th. Just so we can go through the meeting so we know for the next items that we have, which are to go over the recommendations from both the Wellness Committee, the Mental and Behavioral Health Committee, and then to hear from Human Development and Sexuality, kind of what the next steps are. We're not going to have the full robust piece of that just yet, but we really want to make sure everybody understands kind of what's happening in that space. And I wanted to make sure that we gave the update. Ryan, we're thinking that the SHAC recommendations may not be presented in May, but may be presented instead in June. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what we're thinking. And before I jump into that, can I just real quick thank Dr. Amaker and Dr. Mutcher for being here.
Yes,
they're super busy. They probably have various events they still need to go to tonight. So gonna let them out so they can go on to their next thing.
Please, thank you.
So
Thank
thank
you
you
so
guys.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so the May board meeting is pretty full already, and just kind of my thinking was, since we're presenting the curriculum recommendations in June already, that it might be better to do it in one meeting in June, so that I think we can squeeze it in May, but I think it's going to have more more time and more. It'd be one meeting then for all. We could do all the SHAC stuff in one meeting essentially.
Okay, so and that gives me more than just like 2 weeks to do the presentation after we vote on the recommendation. So that's always helpful, because this is where the chair's role really has stepped in putting together the presentation that goes before the board. So that'll give us a little bit more time. But we still need to, according to our bylaws, make sure that we have that vote on officers for May 17th, which is why it might be a shorter meeting. I imagine if we are able to get through the recommendations for the 2 committees today, that I can start working on the presentation and perhaps have the draft ready for you guys as close to done as possible by May 17th. So we can look at that, see if there's any last pieces we need to talk about, as well as do the vote for the officers. And then we will get to our June presentation before the board. Any questions so far? So then I think we're ready to get into the recommendations. I hope everybody did receive the final drafts from both of those committees. I have just kind of set first the Wellness Committee, which I'll like to start with presenting the recommendations.
Yeah, I think I was nominated by the committee to talk again. Do I need to read the document, or do we presume everyone has read it?
Has anybody not received it? Wave your hand if you didn't get it so we can make sure we can email it back out.
I was not able to open it.
Okay.
I didn't have access to it.
So it sounds like I should read it. It's not too long. That's good. We
Okay.
edited it. We took a lot of time to make it shorter. That was one of our goals. So let me adjust my screen and I can get that up for you.
Will it help you if I share my screen so you can look at it and people can see the words? I know everybody kind of learns a little.
You know,
different.
that may help. Yes, you all don't need to look at me. Put that up if you could.
Let's see, wellness. Do y'all see the wellness recommendations?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, are we ready? I'll go at it. So these would be the recommendations from the Wellness Committee, and it's dated there April 5th, but these, as far as our committee is concerned, are our final recommendations for the year. So we'll start with the first one, which is about recess. And I want to give a quick thank you to Ms. Carla Amaker, who helped a lot on solving this one with us this year. And I know she was on the call, so thank you very much. So as it says, recess. Reincorporate the paragraph about recess into all future student handbooks. We believe this paragraph was added in the early to mid 2010s as a response to a SHAC recommendation and was part of each handbook through 2019, but was not included in either the 2020 or 2021 versions of the student handbook. And this is the paragraph as it appeared previously. A minimum of 20-minute daily recess will be reflected in each school's master schedule for grades kindergarten through 5 as a necessary educational support component for all children. As schedules are altered due to campus events such as early release, special programs, guest speakers, etc., recess time may be shortened as needed. Safety rules will be developed, communicated, and enforced through active supervision of students. Prior to limiting recess time as a disciplinary action, other consequences will be considered. So just basic backstory on this one. We had been considering something about recess, and we went down a long rabbit trail that was like solving a really good mystery novel, honestly, to find this out. And we were able to determine that this paragraph had been included in the handbook, but somewhere a couple of years ago, the format for the handbook changed. I could explain how, but I'll keep it brief. And this fell off the handbook. So we think it's a pretty easy recommendation to just put it back in the handbook. Any questions?
Do you think it was an inadvertent?
As far as we know, it was inadvertent.
Okay.
I think it happened in the summer of 2020, which was kind of a bad summer for everybody. So, yeah.
So, Michael?
So, is it currently right now that they can't limit recess time for disciplinary action?
It's not in the handbook at all, but every administrator we talked to said, wait, it's not in the handbook? They've been operating as if this is not policy, but this is in the handbook. I don't know exactly that they can't limit it at all. The conversations I had said there are cases where you have to limit recess for some reason. It says other things should be considered first.
Okay, I get it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Robin?
First of all, thank you so much for doing this recess recommendation. It's so important, and especially regarding discipline. My question is 20 minutes. I know that's the minimum, but that is really not much time, especially for a kindergartner. is it at all possible to increase that at least to like 25 or 30 minutes, at least for the younger children?
I have no idea. Does one of our staff representatives have an answer to that?
Yeah, so there's required instructional minutes for a year. I think it's 75,000. Somebody can correct me on that. It's roughly that. So I mean, everything's a give and take, right? So it's not against any rules or anything. I mean, it could be a recommendation.
Okay. Would we have to then add on to the school day if we added, say, 10 minutes of recess, school would get out 10 minutes later? Or
I don't think necessarily. It would be
okay.
shaved off. It would have to be shaved off other content or instructional time, essentially.
Okay, sure. I have no answer to that. Our committee didn't talk about it, but it's an interesting suggestion that maybe we can look at for next year when we have
I mean,
time to
you
dig
could add
into
10
it.
minutes to the day. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's an option too.
Okay.
And Michael, did you have another question?
Yes, it's just a cautionary tale, I guess. I had a good conversation with the current administrator, not in our district, but talking about, is it House Bill 1445 or whatever, the consequences of failing the STAR, that the school district has to provide so many minutes of intervention, and that's being ramped up in the coming year through the TEA, that they're really going to be enforcing that. And I guess my concern would be that recess would be used to take away to do tutoring, and that's really unhealthy for our kids.
Yeah, I don't think that would be any recommendation that we would make. I think we'll build in recommended time for any kind of the accelerated instruction intervention to happen outside of recess.
Yeah.
Are you
Yeah,
talking about
I
House
would
Bill
recommend
45, Michael?
45,
Is that the
45.
Oh,
one?
thank you. House.
I actually
I'm not good
think
with numbers. Sorry.
if I don't know for sure, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I actually think that there might be language in there that says you're not supposed to do that, or at least in one version there was. But
yeah, it might say recess into. I'd have to look at it again. I know it definitely says you can't pull from like enrichment or elective time. I don't know if it says recess, but I think that's the intent of it, is that you wouldn't do that.
That's kind of how I read it. I'm interested too in that. I'll look into that. That's a good call out, Michael.
And one of the things that I do, just so everybody knows, is take notes as we talk about recommendations, so that when we start the year, I think we started this year with parking lot ideas and ideas that came up the previous SHAC year. So I'm taking notes on this for us to keep looking at that as well. If it doesn't go into our formal recommendations for this year, some ideas that came up for the next year SHAC as well. Any other discussion on the number one from wellness, the recess recommendation? Okay, let's listen
sorry,
to.
can I say something?
Yes,
I'm sorry, I missed the raise hand button. I apologize. I just checked the TEA's FAQ and they can't take that time out of recess. I'll paste the link in the chat, but we should be clear on that. We shouldn't have to worry about it.
Thanks, Robin.
Yeah, and the reason why I brought it up, and I'm glad you found that, I found that too, is because this administrator, again, not in our district, but this administrator was operating on the fact, well, we're just going to have to take some recesses away. So I'm not sure if administrators are getting the full picture or whatnot, but I appreciate that clarification. I'm glad it's not being taken away.
Thank you. And so what we'll do is we'll look at all of the wellness committee recommendations, continue to have discussion, and see if we can get to a vote on them once we hear all the recommendations. So I'm going to scroll this down so we can look at the next recommendations. All right. Can you see it? Did it scroll for you guys too? All right. Oh, Becky, are you frozen? I think we just lost her. Let's give her just a minute. Unless somebody else from wellness wants to pick up. I think she froze and we lost her. Was there anybody else on the wellness committee that wants to go over number 2? Well, it's on the screen. I'll go ahead and read it, and hopefully we'll get Becky back here shortly. So number 2 is celebration treats. And it says to edit the existing paragraph titled celebrations in the student handbook to first suggest that parents and guardians might choose non-food treats. And then next, include that parents are allowed to send any kind of food treat per state education code, and the code is listed there. And that they should politely inform parents that teachers can choose how to hand out treats, including sending food home with students or serving food at the end of the day. Do we want to have any additional discussion on that point? And Ryan, I think you may see if we have, did she come back into the waiting room? Not yet.
No, not yet.
Okay.
Is the current policy that there's no treats, or is that just something that schools have done on their own?
Here's Becky coming back.
Okay.
I don't know. Does somebody else from Round Rock ISD know the answer to that? I think right now, it might be written that they can bring any type of food treat because it is part of the education code.
I mean, that's just what
the suggestion here is to add a suggestion. Yeah.
And so Becky, we lost you for a minute. All we've done is read number 2. No worries.
My kids got home from volleyball and the internet died. Sorry about that,
y'all.
No. Yeah. Okay. So you read that one. Good.
We read number 2. Yes, please.
Sure. So this one comes from a couple years worth of conversations with parents on a lot of different levels. That we know there's a nice paragraph in the handbook that talks about birthday treats, but there have been individual teachers and then grade levels and some whole campuses that have said no food. And that does go against that education code that's listed there. So one of the concerns would be just to say, no, parents are allowed to bring food. And then to put that polite statement, like, maybe the food, your teacher will work with the teacher. They may choose to hand it out at the end of the day. They may just choose to send it all home, but parents are actually allowed to bring food.
Okay. Michael?
Does the code address food allergies? Are they allowed to restrict based on food allergies?
The code that I've read does not say that, but the paragraph that we have included does mention that you should, talk to the teacher about food allergies. Yeah.
That was going to be my question too. I was just curious if that was covered somewhere.
Yeah, and that's also why we included point 1, which was that the recommendation to choose non-food treats. I have kids in 3rd grade and we bring pencils every time because no one's allergic to it.
Right.
But they're onto it.
Yeah, very good.
Sure.
All right. Any other questions about this recommendation? All right. If you want to go on to number 3, the gardens.
Okay, gardens. We've had some awesome work done by Emily, who's also on the call tonight over in the nutrition, food services, whatever you call your department. So we thank her for that one. This one, update the best practices guide for school gardens and keep a list of schools that currently have gardens. Update the list and resend the guide to all campuses annually. Backstory on this one, we know that there are campuses that have school gardens, and if any of us have ever worked on a garden in our own yards or in a community project, we know that if no one pays attention to them, they get pretty nasty, weeds growing, there's no use to it, etc. But a good school garden is a great resource for the whole community. So there is a best practices guide that's on the food service website, and it was long and wordy and nobody wanted to look at it. So it was just a recommendation to make it an attractive guide that had the information people needed so that schools that are considering it in partnership with the PTA or a local church or whatever would have a resource to send. And then the second part of that would be to keep a list of the schools that currently have gardens, because sometimes there are tie-ins that we can do. It'll be nice to know out there, who has a garden, who doesn't. It's pretty simple, just a recommendation. Questions on that one?
I'm just curious, as far as the best practices guide, is there language in there that actually maybe even encourages schools to do this? Like say, hey, listen, these are all the benefits. I mean, just as you were making the point, a really well done school garden can be a tremendous resource for all kinds of things, from biology, horticulture, any number of things. And so is there language already in that best practice guide that, maybe, talks about all of the benefits of maybe creating a school garden? So maybe those schools who hadn't thought about it, oh, hey, maybe we should consider doing that.
Yeah, the current guide I won't talk about. It's long and not very good, and we all agreed it was not very good. But the new guide, I would open it up. Other than my internet issue, I can't get to it on my laptop. But I think it had all of that. It was very inspirational. Okay. It had some nice pictures of, I think it was Pearson Ranch Middle School and one of the elementaries, I don't remember which, that kind of talked about how they had incorporated things about their garden into sustainability lessons and science lessons and maybe even economics lessons. And there's more to it than just, hey, look how a plant grows. So I found it quite motivational. It seemed like it was good in that regard.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
And Dr. Jennifer Faulkner?
Yeah, ties into my question. I was just curious if some of this best practices guide talks about how it is or isn't part of classroom time, if it's structured more as an after-school club. Are there any kind of parameters surrounding, how much time would be woven into classroom time?
I don't remember that in the guide.
Sorry, Becky, I can take that one.
Yes, please. You're here, good.
We do. So there's both of those. So it kind of talks about after school programs, during school programs, and then also we linked a whole, I think it's, oh my gosh, it's like escaping me right now, but Grow, Play, Eat or something, and it's all a TEAT curriculum. So that is all linked in there. So any like administrator or parent can just easily go to there and kind of see how they can incorporate it into their classroom as well.
Anybody else? All right, so if you want to go on to number 4.
Okay, number 4 is a suggestion about multi-campus fitness days. And this is to add a task to next year's SHAC Wellness Committee to research multi-campus fitness days and see how it might fit into the wellness plan. As a backstory on this one, we talked about this back and forth and we couldn't really figure out a way to make it happen. But the idea would be to have some sort of an event where you have multiple campuses get together and talk about fitness and wellness and how it's not just something you do during a class, not something you just do when you're in school, but it affects your whole life. And it got to be, there were too many moving pieces. So we think it might fit better next year because the wellness plan is up for review next year. So this could be something just as you're making lists for what to do next year, add this one.
Okay. So this one's not necessarily a recommendation for the board this year, just to keep on our parking lot. Okay.
Yes, keep on the parking lot. And that's the same as this last one. It's about playgrounds. Would be added task to the wellness committee for next year to work with the district facility staff about new playground purchases and consider how the wellness committee and the facility staff can work together in the future to provide fitness-based comments on new playground equipment. And we got a contact that the person to talk to is Mr. David Holdebeck, Director of Maintenance. Again, not a real recommendation, just adding it to the notes.
Sounds good. So we have 3 actual recommendations and 2 parking lot issues coming from wellness. Was there any questions about these last 2 parking lot issues? Dr. Faulkner, was your hand up for a new thing or was that from the last question?
It was from the last question. I'll just make a comment. I thought the playground refresh all was covered in the last bond cycle, but I suppose you'll get clarification on that as you talk to that group next year.
I'll try to answer that super fast. Yes, the bond people do give input like this campus might need a playground or something, but they don't really give an input to say this particular playground structure that you're considering buying is appropriate for the children at that school or would complement the other equipment. So it's not so much the construction and the cost of the playground, but how can it be used for physical activity?
Thank you. All right.
Can I just say one quick thing?
Yeah.
I love the idea of a multi-campus and Britain, they call it Sports Day, and they have different schools come and they compete, and kids sign up. Everybody has to sign up for one event. I really love that idea.
We used to have it, and they were called field days, right?
I was going to say, I remember having a field day when I was a kid.
Most campuses still have field days at like an individual campus level. Our idea was to have something that might get a couple of campuses together to build community and kind of look for beyond just a field day, which we love to.
That's great.
All right. So, any other discussion on the 3 recommendations? It's from wellness, recess, the celebration treats, and the gardens. Any additional? All right. So let me start with the recess recommendation, which really is trying to add something that may have been inadvertently left off from the handbook, making sure that it is there. I think we're going to parking lot, whether we ask for that time to be increased, it needs a little bit more research about where that extra time would come from. But if we can just have, if you can utilize the chat, that would be great because it's easier for me to keep track. But if you can't do the chat right now, if you want to indicate with putting your hand up or raising your hand that you are in favor of this being in the recommendations to the board for this year. So you could just say in favor, yay.
It may take me a bit to record it because I think I have to record each person's vote. So I will open the chat and then look at the screens. And then remember to vote myself.
All right. So we have...
iPhone's Melissa, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Just making sure I get this accurate. I'm not missing anything.
All right. And is anyone opposed? Please just put opposed in the chat, or now you can raise your hand or do some indicator on your Zoom if you are opposed to this being in the recommendation.
My yes means I'm for it. Sorry. Just was a little late with my vote.
I think we got it. I'm not seeing anybody putting opposed, which I think that means everyone is in favor. So the recess recommendation will go into our recommendations. That is approved. All right. And so then we can go to the second one, which is the celebration treats, which is to edit the existing paragraph in the student handbook to really provide clearer direction on parents' ability to send treats, but to also encourage the collaboration with the teacher and make it clear as far as the role that the teacher plays and how to handle it in the classroom. Any more discussion on the celebration treats recommendation? Okay. If you are in favor of including that in the recommendations this year, please put in favor, yes, yay. Let us know in the affirmative in the chat. All right. And I see the chat calming down. So then if you are opposed to this recommendation, you can put opposed or no in the chat or indicate now on your Zoom with some indicator if you are opposed. Right. Not seeing any movement in the chat or any indicators. This one is also showing everyone is in favor of including this in the recommendation. So it is an approved recommendation that we'll include to the board. And so then we can move to our final recommendation from the Wellness Committee, which is about the gardens, which is just to take what sounds like lengthy and maybe a little dense best practices guide and make that a little bit more friendly for easy reading, update that and the list of schools that do have gardens and send that with a guide to campuses annually. Any more discussion on the recommendation for gardens? Okay, so anyone who is in favor of including that in the recommendations to the board, please go ahead and put in the chat, yes, in favor, yay, if you are in favor of this recommendation formally going to the board. All right. Anyone is opposed to the gardens recommendation going to the board as for this year, please go ahead and indicate on your Zoom or in the chat by saying opposed or no. Okay, not seeing any movement in the chat or any indications on anybody's Zoom. The recommendation related to the gardens is also approved to go to the board. All right. Thank you all very much. And thank you so much to the Wellness Committee. I've taken some good notes. I'm going to put together this in the presentation to show you guys before we do the presentation to the board. Thank you so much. All right. Is the Mental and Behavioral Health Committee ready?
Yes. Do you want me to share the PDF?
If you don't mind, that'd be great.
I can do that. Here we go. Do you want me to talk through them?
Yes, please. Yeah, okay. Let's just take them one by one and see if there's any questions.
Okay. The first recommendation is to establish clear criteria for measurements of success of mental health services for students and staff. For example, standards of goal success, including but not limited to communication about available services, parent community outreach, equity of services for all students, tracking service utilization by ethnicity, identify any disparities in utilization and possible barriers, implement additional communication and strategies to overcome identified barriers in utilization and by campus, staffing of services, for example, the ASCA national model of 250 to 1, and special education access to and coordination of services.
So can you give us some thoughts around why this was a recommendation that the committee felt strongly about?
Because even though we do appreciate the reports that the district does, we did identify some areas that we feel would be good to have some reporting on. For instance, they do track by ethnicity, but they also don't tell us what the ratio is per campus of that. And that's how you can tell if there's a disparity. So just having the board come up with, here's how we want to measure what is success in a mental health program, including we would hope bringing in outside experts. University of Texas, Dell Medical Center, they're all great resources to tell us, by the research what constitutes in a system-wide program that can reach kids in a timely manner and provide the services to students and staff and our community.
All right, questions? And so currently, is it that we don't have that clear criteria? That's not something that y'all were able to find?
We couldn't find that, or in our conversations with Dr. Grosso or some of the other leads, director of counseling, I forget her name, I apologize.
Dr. LaShonda, Dr.
yeah,
Lewis, can I jump in real quick? I did provide a detailed report based by demographic. I didn't put the campus demographics because that's available on their websites. And so that information was distributed to all campus principals and school counselors, and we used it for outreach based on demographics. So even though it wasn't there, it's not like that information wasn't consulted with it. So I just wanted to clear that. And also to say we already partner with Dell Med School for their TCHAT program, and that's been 2 years. So we are associated with other places like that. And then we partner with our research and evaluation. So I just want to make it clear that it's not that we're not looking at those things, that since I've taken over or started behavioral health services, that's been very much an important aspect of what we do.
Thank you, Dr. Grosso. I appreciate that. It's not that these issues aren't happening or these pieces of information aren't coming out. It's that there isn't a gauge to what is appropriate, what is successful. And I don't expect district administration to know that, because that's something that is evolving and coming out. There was an article released in Ed Weekly that talked about the link between teacher shortages and the mental health of students.
No, can I say something too? It's not that me and my staff and Dr. Lewis, that we're constantly looking at that research. It's why we added a staff social worker. So I don't want there to be that we don't look at current research. We're changing a lot of processes this next year based on best practices. And so I don't know if there's a misunderstanding that we don't evolve and look at best practices, but I just want to make that clear that we do, and we're constantly looking at data and evolving and changing our practices.
Absolutely. And again, we are not faulting anyone in this process. However, what we did find was that there is a lack of accountability, and we would like the board to look at what are measures of success. And I think that's important in this process, because that's just something that we found that is needed through our committee work this year.
Okay, and so I still have some questions, just because I'll be the one that they're asking the questions to when I do the presentation. So I want to make sure that I understand that. But I do see that we have a couple of questions from other SHAC members, so perhaps their questions will help resolve my questions. Let me start with Leslie. Go ahead. You're on mute.
Yes, there we go. Sorry about that. So I'm just trying to understand a little bit. So if we know that this data is already being collected and given out per campuses, whenever you're asking for success of the services, what sort of success are you actually looking for, or are you hoping to obtain?
That's what our committee is not saying, what that success should be. That is really up to the board to establish. What is it that they're looking for as far as for example, the amount of time that it takes for a student to receive services. That's just an example. What is it? What kind of gap is acceptable in between who's being served by ethnicity or low SES compared to the campus ratio? We're not establishing what those should be. We're asking the board to establish what those measurements of accountability and what goals they want to set.
So is that to say that we want the board to help define those measurements so that we can look back and say, we know we have been successful because we achieved X, Y, and Z? That's what we're asking them to do?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, absolutely. And especially with Dr. Grosso mentioning all the things that are happening. It's like, hey, we're getting information. We are partnering with people. That's wonderful. Let's do something with all this information that we're now getting and use that to decide, hey, what does success in this district look like? And are we meeting it? If we are, great. How do we maintain that? If we're not meeting it, what needs to change so that we can actually meet these measurements of success that the board itself has created?
And I hear that you're saying you're wanting the board to base that on research. And I guess my secondary part of that, is it research and or research primarily as compared to like our district-wide expectations and culture? Is it a combination that you're hoping for? Or you really want them to look at the research to base the measurements on?
No, it should always, in an equitable model, you always have a partnership with both of those elements.
Okay.
You can't go by research. It can be very sterile and not localized. So you want to be able to look at what our local conditions and goals are for the community as a whole.
All right, Dr. Monica Faulkner.
Yeah, I have some concerns about this. And normally, if you're talking about research and measurement and goals and throw in equity, like I'm all game for it. But my concerns here are, one, I don't think we need to go in front of the school board and say there's no accountability, because this is a very new thing that the district has introduced. And I think the accountability is part of what's being built within it. I think there are those of us, including myself, who fought very hard to get social workers in schools. They're there, and also for the mental health services that are now there. So going back to the board and saying, it's not working, or there needs to be more accountability because we don't like it, I think there's a risk there. Because when I did present to the board the first time, people were doing math and looking at numbers of how much this is going to cost us. So I would just caution us, one, on that. Two, in terms of reporting, the SHAC every year is supposed to get a health and wellness report from the district. So it would be something, these kind of measures and indicators could be included in that report. So when we're asking the board to do something like establish clear criteria, I think we absolutely have to put in something that says, this is how we want you to report this back to us. We want you to tell us by this date how you're going to do this. The final thing I would add is—
Well, hang on just a second. Can you elaborate on that? Are you saying that we should be more specific on what we would like for the board to look at instead of leaving it as open-ended as go look out into the situation?
Yes. Yeah, okay. Because no one's ever going to do this. And I will say that not in a derogatory way, but when we're talking about success of mental health, like what does good mental health look like? I could do a research study for years and not be able to tell you the answer to that. That is a really loaded question. So to ask the board to do that and to go look at research and to figure all this out, I don't think it's very realistic. But I think if we want to know metrics, like what Dr. Grosso was saying, if she has this information, we should put it into the report that comes to the SHAC every year. So the mental health committee just starts with that information right off the bat, and you've got it. And I think that's a real easy fix here to say that that's really what we want. But my third point was really just, I don't understand this, and I write goals all the time and measurable objectives and smart objectives and everything, but I'm sitting here reading and I'm like, what do we mean about communication about available services? Are we going to count how many emails go out? What does that mean? So I'm very skeptical, and I appreciate the work of the committee because I see where you're going with it, but I think it just has to be more specific.
So am I allowed to address this?
Yes.
Okay. So, and if I said something differently, I apologize, but I am not saying that there's no accountability. There's not clear accountability. So we do not know, for instance, when they present to us, this is how long it's taking, this is how many kids, how does that compare to what it should be? That is the problem. And I understand that the committee found that there isn't that clear communication of what is successful. The other issue is that we did go through a very lengthy process of taking a very detailed recommendation, and our committee decided to go with more broad, so that tying the board into this is what's successful, because number one, we're not the experts in that. And number two, it should really be up to the board to decide in whatever fashion that they decide to do it, in what constitutes as measures of success. So I do also want y'all to know that I understand about criterion and about specificity in the details, but we just did not want to go down that path of saying this is what constitutes as equitable mental health services by ethnicity. We just didn't want to define that.
I would just add, I think we have more expertise on the SHAC than the board does to make that recommendation.
Well, and I would assume that they would create a committee or have hearings or whatever to get input from the community. I just didn't feel like
piece too. If I just jump in real quick. So
sure.
One part of this whole process is the SHAC gives the recommendations to the board, which we've talked about we're going to do in June. And then they might ask questions in that meeting. And then the next step is essentially, as an administration, we take the recommendations and I'll share all the different recommendations with each department, and they'll essentially look into them and show what we're currently doing, and then take that back to the board so they can see, what our internal recommendations, what we're actually doing already, and might not be reflected in that. So we can kind of communicate and educate everybody on what's actually happening before then they might make any final decisions on making any then directives to the superintendent to give to departments.
All right, Leslie. You're on mute.
Yes. So last year's recommendation was for the 3-year plan to achieve the student to counselor ratio. So is it fair to say that we're not at that plan, right? Or where are we in the hiring of the counselors for student? Because that would also play into some of that data if all the student counselors have been hired yet to like meet that data and things like that. Wouldn't that kind of play into it in the numbers?
Well,
yeah, I don't have the, go ahead.
I just wanted to be clear that the recommendations from last year, I don't know that they were implemented by the board.
Okay. I didn't remember that.
Leslie, there was an article, I think in the Houston Chronicle, that documented that no school district in Texas is within that ratio. So we definitely aren't, because no one is.
Yeah.
It's a pretty tough ratio to meet.
Okay. And that was I can find it in the Houston Chronicle. Just Google it.
Google it. I can put it in the chat in a sec.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Right, Katie.
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button for a second.
No worries.
As part of, I'm trying to remember where it is, but I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, wouldn't, like, if you're setting measurable criteria for success, isn't the board required to get stakeholder feedback for something like that?
Yeah, so if the board were going to set either directives or goals, that'd probably be part of the Lone Star governance model, where one of their board goals would be, I don't think they're required. I mean, they have already gathered a lot of stakeholder feedback in that process, but that's kind of their mechanism to set goals is through the LSG goal setting process.
Because I guess I was kind of picturing this like to be incorporated for each area of the district to help set those measures of success in different parts of the community and determine for themselves what that looks like, to have input in that process. And within that framework, it seems like that would follow, but maybe I'm misunderstanding that model.
Well, and I just to be clear, as I read the recommendation, it's really one sentence that has some examples. And the sentence is to establish clear criteria for measurements of success of mental health services for students and staff, period. That's how the recommendation is written. And then it says, for example, and then the committee listed some examples.
Yeah, how does it read to people if we just take out everything after
The
staff,
examples.
period?
Yeah. I think that's something we can, when we get ready to decide if we're going to vote, or if there's going to be any motions for changes to the recommendation, we can take a look at that. That might be something we want to look at. Hillary?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted.
So I think I'm just trying to clarify kind of what everybody's talking about in terms of, because it sounds like we have, from what Dr. Gross has said, we have a lot of the data, but I'm kind of just thinking, okay, an example, you're talking about wait times for services. Michael, are you thinking, okay, let's say the SHAC gets a report and it says on average, students waited, a week, 2 weeks, whatever it is for services. But then are you thinking, well, we don't know like what's realistic or even what's normal? Like,
Right.
I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, like, well, we can't necessarily make it 30 seconds. So even if we get all this data, are you thinking like, well, we don't necessarily know, is waiting 2 weeks for services good or bad,
Right.
or neutral?
Yes, that's what the SHAC was concerned about. Yes, we see the data, we appreciate it, but even with some of us as mental health providers can't say this is good practice or there needs to be improvement.
Can I say one thing with that I think we're talking about two different things too, like the role of the counselor, the school counselor, and then everything that sort of falls in my bucket, which everything I deal with has to have parent or guardian has to approve for them to have those services. And so even when we talk about wait times, it's not just because there's not providers available. Sometimes it's parents not returning forms or those kind of things, or even parents refusing services. And so while I see that we would want a clear cut, it gets really nuanced and complicated. I will say without a doubt, our wait times are less than what's in the community.
Okay. And Dr. Jennifer Faulkner?
So I'm coming at this, I'm on the committee. I have a 15-year practice in mental health, outpatient mental health through the VA system. I'm not practicing any longer. But we always have standards in healthcare systems. We have to set quality standards. A lot of those are set by regulatory agencies. A lot is set by best practices and research. So I understand this department is in its infancy, but this is really the time to be setting those quality standards and be working towards something. We've made a large investment in resources, and I understand that everybody is, working toward quality that we're providing to the students, but there's some very time-sensitive things in mental health that, we really do need to make sure, particularly when we're dealing with more serious mental illness, that we are meeting what are those best practice standards. And so we have a lot of information available, but I don't think we're to the level yet where we're, setting a goal to meet a standard of practice that would be very common in a health system. So if we want to have this health system built within the school infrastructure, we have to be delivering those best practices to these students, because some of them are needing something much more extensive than I'm having a bad day and I'm having some stress, I need someone to talk to. Some of them are diagnosed with very serious mental illness or are on that path, and we really need to be getting those people to the right places in the right amount of time. So I think it's of the essence that somehow we are moving down this path of establishing what those best practice quality standards look like. And the other big thing we talked about in the committee was utilization. There is so much stigma still in mental health that people don't seek help. It can be very cultural. And that is absolutely what we wanted to get the district to, with getting that type of information and that type of standard, and really beginning to dive into where we have those barriers and trying to overcome those. You know, we've had suicides within the district. You're seeing a lot of attention nationally right now with athletes committing suicide. So we want to be able to prevent that outcome. We want to be able to treat people with serious mental illness as quickly as possible, because their outcomes are most successful when they happen quickly, whether that be through counseling, through medication, a combination of both. So I'll leave it at that.
Kelly?
Yeah, because I know that Dr. Grosso, like that the services that the social workers provide are like rightfully so a source of great pride, and that Dr. Grosso cares so much about them. Like, I don't hear anything here that's like incongruent with defining goals. I feel like there's some conflict about the level of specificity. And my thought on this is, like, I agree with Dr. Faulkner that it is super important to have like these metrics of success. I also think it's really important that Dr. Grosso be like right in the middle of defining what that success looks like, because she knows what the details, like what the challenges, specific challenges in reporting would be. I also think there's a lot of benefit to having these, you know, having metrics of success defined so that there's a case to be made for additional funding and additional social workers in the future when, you know, we're not really able to, you know, if we're not able to meet certain goals despite doing all the things, you know, then you can go back. Anyway, so that's just my 2 cents on that. Like, I sincerely hope that this isn't received by social workers or the board or anything as a criticism, anything other than support, and, you know, just a 100% support for the services that the department provides to our students.
Okay, and Cornell?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I really think if we were to move the second sentence and the first graph down so that it's separate, and maybe we can clean up that sentence, I think that would make it much more clear that, hey, the top sentence, this is what we are saying, this is our main recommendation. Here are examples and maybe guidance that we would have, you know, for you in looking at these and creating these measurements of success, because I think it's important to provide some guidance while not saying this is exactly what needs to happen, because we're not the only experts. There are any number of people that the board can and should talk to establish these, Dr. Grosso being one of them. And I think as the SHAC, you know, committee, we do have a responsibility of saying, hey, these are some areas that we would like to make sure are parts of the measurement of the success, because these are areas where maybe students are slipping through the cracks, where maybe families are not accessing these services that are available because they have stigmatism around, you know, accessing services, or there are maybe different ways that we can reach out to them. I'm not sure, but I think the overall point that we were really saying is important here is establishing that criteria so that we do have some kind of way to measure if we're successful or not successful, what needs to change, what we need to keep. And then in the examples of, hey, here are some areas to look at when deciding these measurements of success, I think it's important to have some of these examples so that at least they have some guidance. And I think it's important we say not limited to. So we're not saying this is all we need to look at. These are some areas that you might want to, you know, you might want to go to in deciding ultimately what success looks like in all these services and, you know, in our district as a whole.
Thank you. Dr. Monica Faulkner?
Hi, I know we need to wrap up the conversation, So just my last thought, I am absolutely not against metrics or the utilization of them, but I believe that this is the SHAC's responsibility to make the recommendation to the board, not for the board to try to figure out. We have expertise on SHAC. Multiple people are mental health professionals. I feel like the committee could have figured it out and provided something a little bit more concrete. So for that reason, I'll just say, like, I can't vote for this as it's written, but I appreciate the intent and the need for metrics. So thank you.
Just real quick, the board wouldn't create them. They would direct us to create them. Or they wouldn't direct me. They would direct the superintendent for a department to, whether it's mental health or curriculum or anything, they would direct him to have that department create metrics of success. They wouldn't, that'd be way outside their lane of governance. So I don't think they would essentially be in the weeds of actually creating any metrics.
Well, and to that point, I think that also means if we as the committee were to say, this is what you need to do, they would say, hey, thanks, we're going to now ask the superintendent to ultimately decide this. So even like we could make more specifics, but the more specifics we make, the more that may or may not really be listened to. Whereas if we say, hey, here's some areas to look at, that at least gives who ultimately will make that decision some kind of guidance as opposed to directions, which, you know, I think we were really trying to avoid going there because we are both supposed to make the recommendations as opposed to directing them where to go and making it's a fine line. It's a very fine line.
I want to just second that, Cornell, because like I don't feel qualified at all as a committee member to tell Round Rock ISD how to define it. I mean, I have another job that has nothing to do with education, and that's what you do. So I feel like it would have been inappropriate and not a good use of our time to develop thorough recommendations to tell y'all how to do your job or how to define success, rather than to just say like we should have, like y'all should develop that, like knowing what y'all are the experts. So
okay. Hillary.
So I wonder if I was just trying to like think how I'm always trying to think how to logic these things out. I mean, there's voting on the recommendation itself, but I wonder if there's also the parking lot issue of, you know, what would the committee next year, like, I would think the parking lot would include like looking at the data that we have available, and deciding, you know, how specific, you know, if there are more specific recommendations we want to make based on that data. And I mean, I also want to say I was
just going to say, so if we do not approve this recommendation to go forward to the board, and instead the group wants to put it on the parking lot to look deeper or to dive deeper into it for the next SHAC year, that is something we can do also. We've done that last year and move them forward to this year. But
and then looking more closely at the data. And I do want to say, like, I know sometimes the word, you know, like accountability can feel like a very kind of like heated word. And I appreciate everything's been district do it. I just want to say, like, I haven't seen the data myself. I myself worked not in Round Rock ISD or even in Central Texas, but as one of these school-based social workers who was, you know, at a mental health services center. So I've done that work before. And I mean, in some districts I was in and in districts I've worked with currently, I mean, wait lists are like, people get in by the end of the school year if they get on the wait list at the beginning of the school year. So I understand like wanting to have concerns and make sure things don't kind of head in that way, because I've seen how easily that could happen. So I do understand that.
And I have a clarifying question, just because it was the first and second SHAC meeting I provided all the data, and just did that not get out? I felt like I sent it to everyone, so I'm just confused at people saying they never got it.
For me personally, I mean, I'm not on the mental health committee, so I probably forgot it.
No, and that was just me. Like, was it not in an appropriate way? Because I know the first meeting I gave it to the mental health committee, and then it was given to everybody. So, and that's just for me to learn going forward next year. Is there a different way to provide that information?
And Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think the issue, and Michael is the one that said it. So by all means, clarify yourself if you start to need to, Michael. But I think the issue was not so much, hey, we don't have information. I think it's more like, hey, there are parsing out of this information. There's an understanding of how well we are or are not doing that is not included. And of course it's not, because we don't have those standards. And so I don't think it's a matter of, oh, we're being kept in the dark, we don't have information we need. It's more, okay, this is good information to have, but what's the picture of what's going well, what's not going well? How do we decide that this is part of our recommendation is, hey, district, let's actually determine that, and then determining that, let's make sure that we are paying attention to those areas of those people in the district and those communities in the district that are not maybe being looked after or are slipping through the cracks when it comes to these services, so that we can make sure that all the efforts that are going into what we're doing are making sure to serve as many people as possible, and that we have clear measurements so that the good work being done, we can't say, hey, look, this is awesome work that we're doing here. Okay, here's some places we were falling short. Is there support that's needed? Why are we falling short? Let's look at that. So I don't believe that you did not do a good job of giving us information. I think you did a fine job. I think it's more in being able to then use that information to decide, okay, where do we stack up? And what is it that where do we want to stack up? And how far or how close are we to that measure? That's how I would respond.
I would like to let the committee finish reading through the rest of their recommendations. I want to be mindful that we scheduled till 8. Sometimes these voting meetings take a little bit longer, but if we lose too many people, then we will not have a quorum and we cannot vote. But since our next SHAC meeting is going to be short, we could also decide to make it a little bit longer if we need to finish this up because we're losing too many people. So just letting you all know we have some options, but let me go ahead and let Michael move on.
Okay, so the second one, and this would be good to have some feedback from Ryan, because in the latest budgets, I'm not seeing this specificity, but a previous CFO for the district had told us that up to 45% of special education funds can go to the general education fund. And if that is still the case, we would like the board to, in the future, have those monies kept in special education to fully fund special education staff and so forth, because we do believe that does tie to mental health and behavioral health and being able to fully service our kids in special education.
Yes, I'd have to get with our new CFO for specifics on that, but I mean, I think it's a fine recommendation. I don't think it's
okay. Thank you.
Out of line or anything.
All right. Any questions about this recommendation? Okay. I'm going to go on to your next one.
Yes. So on number 3, actually, I learned quite a bit from Dr. Grosso's presentation along with other district people when I went to the roundtable. So really the first sentence is what we're asking to have happen, to add the existing mental behavioral health services for adult transition to the Future Readiness website. I think that would be very helpful. The committee would also like the district to consider adult transition services like life skills, SEL education, as adult transition, not necessarily just a student service. Coordination being in the form of a task force, having services or an adult transition fair similar to what special education students do, having communication and a better place of pertinent district websites, like a hub with all the pertinent links. Standardization could be through greater uniformity and best practices of SEL. I know that there are a lot of programs and the majority of the district is using particular programs, but it can create inequities when, you know, one school is only doing 15 minutes and another school is doing 45 minutes. But we also aren't saying that everybody should be doing everything the same way. And then in part, this would help the district conform to the legislated K through 12 curricular requirements in the bill that passed SB 11.
All right, questions about this recommendation? Can I ask, so you put the website that you're talking about adding the existing mental and behavioral health services, but you also talk about the possibility of would it be creating a hub, or is there already a hub that you were thinking about?
I think creating a hub.
Creating a hub, okay.
You know, the website's changed so much that, you know, what we were finding as issues in the beginning of the year seemed to get fixed along the way. But when I went to that presentation, the future readiness, that seems like a really great place for, you know, educating our young adults where they can get help when they graduate, what colleges have mental health, behavioral health, or case management in their programs, you know, things like that.
All right. Other questions, discussion? And I guess it doesn't sound like creating that kind of hub for all the information to be easily accessible and kind of more centralized would be a heavy lift, but do we know, is that, I don't know, is there any policies around the way we have our website set up and what we share? I know sometimes they try and have some uniformity, and working for government.
I mean, there's stuff. We definitely have a webmaster that tries to make sure we're using the right formatting and all that, but I don't think it'd be a
not too bad
difficult task. Yeah.
Helpful to know. Thank you. All right, and then oh wow, it is your last recommendation. Go right ahead.
So this one is to more closely monitor and act on attacks on staff and students on social media through the use of an alert system that communicates in real time risks so that parents can be informed of and monitor their child's safety. We would also like the district to consider, and again, this is a consideration, we're not dictating that this should happen, but we're not legal experts. Using legal services and as an assertive arm of the district, it uses the civil court system to act as a deterrent and with urgency in shutting down social media, bullying, and anonymous attacks online to staff and students, and provide rules of oversight when administrators and district police are monitoring social media incognito. But you know, Ryan had said that he would look into that. What are those policies like for the district police?
Do you know of such an alert system that already exists? That's the thing that stands out to me the most.
We are switching some systems to actually combine a lot of different programs we use. And so the system we've used, Gaggle, we're actually going to a different one called Detect that does the same thing of Gaggle, but it'll also monitor outward facing. We can't do inward facing, but outward facing social media, so that will be coming into place next school year. And so there will be it just scans for different things like threats to others, but also threats to self and those type of things. So it's just like our Gaggle system, but we'll do G Suite monitoring plus outward facing social media. Just wanted to let y'all know that.
Dr. Grosso, what's outward? And I'm sorry, I maybe should know this, but what's outward facing social media versus inward facing?
It's if it's public, like they can't monitor if somebody has something locked down that's not public viewed. It's just the only way they can do that.
So are you saying that something, I mean, aside from, I mean, it looks like we have again one sentence and then also consider. But as far as the first part of the sentence, is it what you're saying is that that's kind of already being done? It's going to be implemented next year?
I don't know if that's what they're thinking of. I just wanted to let y'all know that is coming, since it's something completely new that we've not had.
Okay. And I don't know, is that the committee think that that's going to already be addressed, knowing that that's coming?
So let me describe the scenario that several of our committee members came to. Someone who has an anonymous account on, I believe, Instagram, was allowing, having kids join and disseminate derogatory and alarming information on the site. You would only know this if you were a private member. However, it has been known for a while, and as parents, we have not received any information that this is going on. I only knew through the grapevine to look on my son's phone. So that's the type of stuff that we're asking for. If there's a monitoring, great, but let's also have a way to shoot that information out, or have a website where parents can say, okay, what do I need to be looking for on my kid's phone? Because it's not just kids, it's also staff that they're making comments about that are really alarming, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it because of the legalities of it. Can't stop it. Even if you can, they'll just pop up again. Knowing where these sites are or what accounts they are is very helpful.
Especially when these accounts are utilizing actual student names.
Yes.
They're identified, these students that are targeted for cyberbullying, they are identified using their first and last names with very serious allegations about these students. And, if parents didn't know about it, I mean, again, it goes back to mental health. These cyberbullying instances can definitely affect a student, on a given day, how they're going to react to it.
Robin, did you have something you wanted to add? Then I saw your hand up.
I was a little bit curious about how this would work. Like, what I'm imagining is somebody's at home and they post something on Facebook, and then somehow the school is like looking specifically for the names of students enrolled in the school, and they're, nobody has gone to that Facebook page at school, but they're still trolling the web looking for cyberbullying of students. Is that the intent here? Am I mistaken on how this would work? Did you specifically not specify how it would work?
Right, because we didn't even know about this outward monitoring. I mean, that's we're not trying to box the district in and how they should be doing this monitoring. If they know of something, we'd like to know. That's really what we're asking.
And Dr. Grosso, do you know how that that's going to be rolled out, how that actually works? I mean, like, for example, I have a monitor to see if my name comes up in any public, media outlets. I just put keywords together. Anybody could do that kind of Google search thing that gives you the notifications. Is that what it's like, or is it something different?
No, and it does it based on different criteria, but it's mainly for safety reasons. And if a kid is saying something of harming self or others, that then the campus would follow up on it in the same way they do with gaggles now. So it's not, that if it involves a student, that parents are notified, those type of things, which we've been doing anyway with gaggle. I understand the concern with these. We've gotten so many anonymous alerts and stuff about a lot of the groups they're talking about. I know the problem is Instagram won't even shut them down. I know a lot of times they've tried to get them shut down. The district has, and that's the social media platform won't do that.
Dr. Monica Faulkner?
Kind of the same issue with this one. Is there a way to make this accountable to us as the SHAC? So instead of more closely monitor, say something like, the district will investigate and write us a report that shows how they are doing this, instead of just do it, because then we don't know if it's been done or not. So just some sort of accountability mechanism where they give us a report next year, something. Especially if we're asking them to use legal services, I'm guessing someone would investigate that and say yes or no, and then they could give us a report back that says that they did look into it, something like that. Just more specificity here.
And I would just be cautious with the language. If we were going to approve the number 4, I would probably want to wordsmith the intent a little bit better. My concern is directing the board or recommending the board to seek litigation is what it looks like to me. And I don't know that we want to go there. So it might just be about language if we move that recommendation forward.
I think that it would be reasonable to take out the bullets, they also consider, and just have that, the main sentence of it. Really, as a committee, we were looking at having these for clarification, but if it's bogging down, well, what about this, what about that, then it's losing its purpose. So I think that's a reasonable consideration.
Hillary?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I really appreciated the part about informing parents, because I understand that, you know, with that Instagram account, it sounds like there's nothing can be done legally, but am I understanding from some of y'all that like parents weren't informed that account is going on? Because at the very least, even if nothing can be done, you know, Instagram is this huge company, it's not going to happen. If parents are at least aware and can have these discussions with their kids and their kids' friends and other parents, I mean, just being able to educate your kids and other parents and react as a community can be really helpful on a grassroots level, even if it stays up there.
Katie?
I have to apologize to my subcommittee because I am on the mental health subcommittee, and the meeting where this item was discussed, I had a conflict that evening with one of my kiddos. So I'm sorry for not providing this feedback during our subcommittee meeting. I actually think the bullet points should be removed, particularly item A. We'd have to talk to, I think that Jacob Woolston maybe is the legal. I actually think item A constitutes a conflict of interest for the district. I don't think that they could do that.
Well, I think, sorry to interrupt you, Katie. I think where that one might have come from is this account was brought to the attention of David's Legacy Foundation, who works on cyberbullying or prevention of cyberbullying. And they said that they have lawyers who could subpoena Instagram, subpoena the account to determine who the person is behind the account, so that they could identify if it was a student, because it is a pretty toxic account. And so I looked into that further, and they said, you know, we could get you a pro bono lawyer, but, you know, certain parents didn't qualify just financially. But looking, you know, it was brought to Jacob Woolston and asked if maybe perhaps the legal department could be the ones to subpoena the account to find out.
Not outside of the, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm a paralegal, so grain of salt, maybe. I mean, and I think it would have to happen in the context of a lawsuit. Like even lawyers can't just usually just randomly issue subpoenas to people outside of a lawsuit, is my understanding.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm fine taking the bullets out. I feel like, you know, communicating with Ryan and Dr. Grosso, kind of what the intent behind the bullet, not even including the legal services, was because it's so easy. Like, you know, if my kid has a toxic account and then I find out about it, it's not hard for her to shut that down and then go start another one. Hypothetically, she would never, but like for the district, if they find out about, you know, as they find out, consider, I don't know, making an example of certain students, right? Because the thing is that there just really doesn't seem to be any consequence to what's going on. You know, everything can be done in secret and under aliases, and, you know, in social media, they don't really verify information, and it doesn't matter. Like, you can just say what you will without consequence. So for students, to the discussion in the committee, Dr. Grosso and Ryan, is that if there are examples set for some of the worst offenders of some of these things, so that other students see, like, okay, there are actually consequences of this. It's not just like a slap on the hand at home or what have you. That was the thinking behind that. But I do agree that the legal services piece language in there might be alarming and off-putting, and we can get rid of that.
Cornell?
Yeah, I was just going to offer, there's a lot of hang up over the examples, and it's tough because if we don't provide examples, then we have the issue, that Dr. Monica Faulkner brought up, hey, we don't write up specifics. But then if we put in too many specifics, then it's like, okay, you're trying to tell the board what to do. So we're really stuck in that kind of paradox there. And what I would offer is we can take out the bullets and maybe we can put them in another document that maybe we would offer to the board, say, these are examples, this is guidance with all these recommendations that we would offer. So then people don't have to get hung up on these, which are really just examples. I mean, we state, hey, for example, in all of these recommendations, but in seeing them the way that they're put, it's very easy for people to get caught up on them and have that be the thing, as opposed to the main thing is the recommendation. So perhaps we can take out the bullets and say, hey, we'll have this be an addendum, to our recommendations. So if they're wondering, hey, like what example? Oh, here's some examples we have for you, so that we can have that ready when they ask. And it would make sense they would ask, but we can still have the main recommendation go forward, because I know we put in quite a bit of work, and we had a number of meetings and a number of calls to talk and to try to actually work and solve this. And I know there's more can be done. And I think by and large, the recommendations on their face, without the suggestions and examples, are actually pretty well thought out and pretty good. I mean, they can certainly be adjusted, but I think by and large, they're pretty solid. So I think if we were to agree to just take out the examples and just have the recommendations stand without the examples for guidance, that might be a good way to go.
All right, and so we're almost at a quarter after, and so we've got some suggestion in the chat from Dr. Monica Faulkner that maybe we wordsmith it and vote at the next meeting. I hear Cornell saying maybe we just take the sentence without the examples and vote on those. Just so everybody knows, there will be a presentation, and then there will also be a more thorough report on the work that we've done on the SHAC. And so what I try and do, which is why I'm taking diligent notes and understanding the essence and spirit of how we got to these recommendations, is to put that kind of description in a digestible manner to the board in the report. And then the presentation will be more of the actual recommendation, full stop. And then in the presentation, I will do some explanation that what I'm getting from the committees to understand. So y'all know how that's going to work. And so I intend to start working on it. But the question is, does either Dr. Faulkner want to make a motion about wordsmithing and then voting them on the next meeting, or does Cornell want to make a motion on voting on some of these without including the examples? I think right now I am ready to take a motion related to the recommendations for the Mental and Behavioral Health Committee.
I would motion.
Go ahead.
I motion to table the recommendations until our next meeting on May 17th.
Okay, so I have a motion on the floor right now. Do I have a second for that motion to table the Mental and Behavioral Health Committee recommendations until our next called meeting, which is going to be on May the 17th? Any second? I see Leslie is seconding. All right, so if you are in favor of tabling these until the May 17th.
Is there discussion before a vote?
Okay, yes, discussion, go ahead.
Is that a called meeting or is it a regular meeting?
It is a called meeting.
I'm concerned that we would not have, there's a possibility we wouldn't have a quorum. I would like to offer an alternate motion.
Okay, And just so everybody knows, at our called meeting, we also need to vote on officers. So we'll have to have a quorum, or we'll have to reschedule that meeting altogether if we don't have a quorum.
I would motion that we take out the bullets and vote as presented.
I second that motion.
Okay. Dr. Faulkner, I'm trying to go through the rules. We've had an alternate motion.
Yeah, I think we need to vote on the first motion before we take up a second motion, right?
No, I think it's the other way around. We vote on the alternate motion first. If that fails, then we go back to the first motion.
Gotcha. Okay.
Correct. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And so we had any discussion on the alternate motion? Okay. So the alternate motion, again, Katie, let me make sure it's correct, that we just take out the we take out the examples on the recommendations and just vote on them each without the additional bullet points.
Correct.
Okay. And any other discussion on that? Okay. Dr. Jennifer Faulkner, you have a discussion on that?
Yeah, my only advocacy for that is we've spent a lot of time discussing this. It's fresh on everybody's mind. I don't want to spend a lot of time in a future meeting rehashing everything. So I think tonight makes the most sense to vote on them.
Okay. So any other discussion? This is on the alternate motion. So then on the alternate motion, to go ahead and remove the examples and vote individually on the, oh, Becky, is that a discussion that you had?
Yes, sorry, wrong hand. I just want to make sure that applies to point 1, point 3, and point 4.
Correct. And then
Okay,
we'll go individually and vote on them individually. We're not going to vote on them bulk.
No,
we're just going to
thank you.
yeah. Okay. And so then any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the alternate motion to go ahead and move forward with voting on the Mental Behavioral Health Committee recommendations and just moving out the examples and bullet points for recommendation 1, 3, and 4. Please either raise your hand, say aye, yay, yes in the chat, or otherwise indicate in the affirmative. And I do see a nay. Okay, if you are opposed, go ahead and put in the chat opposed or nay, or right now indicate on your Zoom with a character, a hand wave or something if you are opposed to the motion. Okay. So the majority of the SHAC has voted in favor of the alternate motion, so it carries, which I think makes the first motion moot. So we'll go ahead and move forward with voting on the recommendations just by pulling out the actual follow-ups, the bullet points. So I'm going to read each one. We're going to go through them and vote. The first recommendation is to establish clear criteria for measurements of success of mental health services for students and staff. That is the end of the sentence. The rest is the example, and that part would not be included in the recommendation. Any additional discussion on that recommendation? Okay. And I know there was some discussion as to we could table some recommendations that don't make it forward this year. So any ones that we don't, if it doesn't follow through and get approved, then we can talk about if we want to put this on our parking lot for next year. So then if there's no more discussion on that first recommendation, all those in favor of the recommend, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just have to say, like, I really want to vote in favor of these, but until I can see like the actual words, I don't feel confident. So please forgive me for voting nay. I'm sorry. I just wanted to see like the edits before I vote on anything. So
no, I totally understand that, and I don't think that I'm not going to take it personally. I totally understand you want to be as clear as possible with it.
Yeah, I just want to see the words on paper in a way that makes sense to me. So I apologize, but I'll probably just abstain then. Can I do that? Is that a choice?
You can.
Okay, good. That's my choice, Hillary. You can write it down.
So then any more discussion? All right, on recommendation number 1 to establish the criteria for measurements of success. All those in favor, please put in the chat. Yes, yay, in favor. You can indicate on your Zoom by waving your hand or any character. All right. And seeing the chat slow down and no more indicators on the Zoom. Anyone opposed, please put nay, opposed, or not in favor in the chat, or go ahead and now do an indicator on your Zoom with a character or a hand wave. We do have a couple of no's, and I'll just, any abstentions? I think we have Dr. Monica Faulkner. All right. Okay, I think in getting all of the votes, it does look like the first recommendation has been approved. Just that first sentence from the recommendation without the additional examples. All right. So then the second one is about ensuring that all state allocated special education funds are earmarked for special education and not the general fund. This one didn't have the caveat from the alternate motion. It's what it is. It's just that plus the sentence. This will help in staff shortages, funding issues for newly qualified students with disabilities, and pay for the raise in minimum wages for paraprofessionals. Any additional discussion on the special education funds recommendation?
I would add the note that the pay raise for paraprofessionals passed the board meeting. I think it was board meeting before last. So I don't know if we want to take that out or not. Because that recommendation was made before that happened.
It was my understanding that they funded through this year. Have they funded next year?
It's not it wasn't a one-time.
Wasn't a one-time raise.
It was a salary increase, yeah.
Well, I think we could adjust to say to help pay for, I mean, that's the intent. It's not to make sure that they do raises, that it's to help pay for the raises. But I also understand if you want to take that out.
So is there a motion to
either way.
So is there a motion to either add help pay for? So I think.
Oh, that's a good idea. We can just
it would
add
be
the
a
word
motion
help.
just to add the word help. Yeah.
I make a motion to add the word help between and pay.
I'll second that.
All right, any discussion on that motion for the second recommendation? Okay, all those in favor of adding the word help between and pay on the second recommendation, say aye. Go ahead and put that in the chat. Yes, in favor, or indicate on your Zoom that you are in favor. All right, anyone opposed, please put no, not in favor in the chat. And if you are wanting to abstain, you can put that in the chat as well. Okay, it looks like everyone was in favor of adding that. So then the second recommendation does have, as far as the second sentence, this will help in staff shortages, funding issues for newly qualified students with disabilities, and help pay for the raise in minimum wages for paraprofessionals. Any more discussion on the second recommendation? All right, all those in favor of the second recommendation, please indicate so in the chat. Yes, yay, a. All right. Anyone opposed can put no, opposed, not in favor in the chat, or indicate on your Zoom that you're not in favor. And anyone who wishes to abstain, you can put that in the chat or indicate now. All right. See, the chat has slowed down, no more indicators. That second recommendation has been approved with the motion that adds the word help. All right. So then the third recommendation would be add existing mental and behavioral health services for adult transition to the Future Readiness website. And it ends there. There were some considerations, but we're not going into all of those. There may be some discussion as to the essence of how we got there and what the thoughts are of the SHAC, but this will be the actual recommendation, is just that sentence. Any more discussion on the recommendation number 3? Okay, all those in favor of recommendation number 3, that's just that first sentence with context being provided through the report and the presentation, please go ahead and put in the chat yes, a, in favor, or indicate on your Zoom that you're in favor? All right, anyone opposed, please note that in the chat. No, opposed, not in favor, or indicate on your Zoom that you're not in favor. Anyone who wishes to abstain, you can indicate so now on your Zoom or put that in the chat. All right. Recommendation number 3 is approved with the majority in favor, with just that first sentence as the recommendation. All right, our fourth and final recommendation, which is about, and I'll read the sentence, it'll be just the one sentence: more closely monitor and act on attacks on staff and students on social media through the use of an alert system that communicates real-time risks so that parents can be informed of and monitor for their child's safety. Any discussion?
Can we ask the committee if we can just table this one so you can add in words about that they're going to report back to the SHAC or somebody? Because otherwise you don't know that they've done it. You don't know that anything's happened. And I know, I mean, after like 7 years on the SHAC, I've seen this multiple times. You ask somebody to do something, but if you don't have some sort of mechanism where they report it out publicly, report it back to the SHAC, etc., then it doesn't get done. So I would love for
and in that vein, I think we all, because I think the committee said they didn't know that the what was going to be rolled out next year was even coming. So, you know, this may be a good one to table to see what happens and what we collected. Maybe we could have a more formed recommendation, because I would say I don't even know exactly. I have all the details on how it would work. So that is an option and it's a thought, but any more discussion and then we can take up any motions.
I tend to agree with both of you on that. My only concern is the types of attacks, and it really should say verbal attacks, but the types of those attacks are very alarming and could push kids to a mental health state that could be harmful to themselves or others. So that's my concern. And maybe if we could just quickly hash out or add on, closely monitor and report to the SHAC, something like that.
Okay, so Katie, discussion?
Sorry.
I'm actually kind of uncomfortable with this one. Like the idea that y'all are trying to figure out how to roll out House Bill 4545 accelerated instruction, and we're asking the school district to monitor our kids outside of school. I don't know how this fully formed looks like. And then we're also asking for them to bring in like the legal team to also enforce it. There's a lot
we're
about
not doing that part. That part's not making part.
Really uncomfortable.
The legal part out.
The legal part's out.
No, I know but there's more that makes me uncomfortable about it, I think.
But I have an idea. So instead of monitor, maybe we could say something to the effect of report known acts of verbal attacks, yada, 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 to the SHAC and parents. I think maybe that would help. So that way, whatever mechanism the district is doing, we're not asking them to go out and, create, a FBI
and identify the threator to the SHAC as well.
No, that's not
okay.
what
I mean,
asking.
we're just like, there's a lot of ambiguity here that just I can't vote for this one without like a total rewrite of it. And I'm again apologize to my subcommittee because I just wasn't like when the formation of item 4, and I'm not trying to blindside you guys. I don't think I can vote for this one.
Any more discussion?
It's hard for me to imagine a reiteration of it that I could.
Sure.
To be honest with you.
And my only concern is the stuff that was brought, the issues that were brought to the SHAC were very alarming, that if parents didn't know, I would be worried that my kid would take his life if he was targeted. That's my concern.
One of the other things to understand, and one of the other options is in the report, I will talk about the different things that we talked about at our SHAC meeting. So different presentations that we got and different discussions. And I'm happy to highlight this issue as a concern of the SHAC if it for some reason doesn't get approved this time around or it gets tabled. I'm definitely gonna, in our report, talk about we had this conversation and this was of concern to the SHAC. But whether it comes out in a formal recommendation is what we're gonna vote on now. I think Jennifer Faulkner, Dr. Jennifer Faulkner had her hand up next.
I want to echo Michael's comments that I think this should not go to the parking lot list. I think we can add that language and report back to the SHAC. So I would actually like to make a motion that we add that specific language to the first bullet point and move forward with voting on it.
Okay, let me get other discussion and then we'll come back to your motion so I can see if there's a second. Becky, do you have some additional discussion?
I was going to move to table this question because it's 8:30 at night and I think wordsmithing it in a large group is not getting us very far. So that I would table with a discussion, with a recommendation that this committee go talk to some of the experts that are on this call and come up with a solid recommendation for our next meeting.
Okay, and so you're thinking more about potentially motioning to table this not till next SHAC year, but till our next meeting.
Yeah, if they could get it done, I think they would be better if there were a small group of people who understand it better. Talk about it in the next week and see if we can bring it up at that next meeting.
Okay.
I second the motion.
Okay, hang on. So any more discussion just as the recommendation is right now? Okay, so we have a first motion. Dr. Jennifer Faulkner, can you reiterate your motion?
Yeah, my motion is that we keep the recommendation intact, obviously without the bullet points, and add the language that the school board will report back to the SHAC.
Okay. Is there a second for that motion that we just add the language about and report back to the SHAC about the attacks on staff and students?
I'll second that.
Okay, so that's been seconded by Cornell. Any more discussion on this motion? Okay, so all those in favor of the motion that we move forward with voting on the recommendation by just adding the language that there will be a report back to the SHAC. All those in favor, please put in the chat yes, A, or in favor. All right, I see the chat slowing down. Anyone opposed to the motion to move forward on the vote for the recommendation number 4 with adding the language that there will be a report back to the SHAC? Please indicate in the chat opposed, not in favor, no, or indicate on your Zoom. Okay, so Robin's moving your yes to a no, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Did everybody vote except for me?
I was about to say, it's a tie, isn't it? I was doing a count myself.
Okay. So we have 6 in favor of this motion and 6 opposed to this motion. And I have not voted. And for me on this one, I would be opposed. So then that means this motion does not pass. So then I heard there was a second motion. Is that right?
I move that we table this discussion until that next meeting coming up sometime in May, whatever the date is.
May 17th, so just in 2 weeks.
Yep.
All right, any second of that motion?
I'd like to second it, but I'd ask the question, and we can vote on it if there's.
And vote,
the
yes.
word. Yeah, I second the motion.
That's your intention for the motion, right, Becky?
Yeah, I think this matters, but I don't think we can come up with a language we'll all agree on at 8:30 at night. So I'd like to see it when we're all more fresh.
Okay. And so we have Michael seconded that motion to table wordsmith, bring it back for a vote on the May 17th called meeting. Any discussion on that motion?
To be clear, would it be our subcommittee that would
be responsible?
Wordsmith it? Okay.
Yes, and I think if you wanted to pass around language, my hope would be if this motion passes, that we would send that around over email and comment before we get to May 17th.
I'll make sure I participate, Michael. I'm sorry to have blindsided you during this meeting.
No, that's perfectly okay.
All right. Any other discussion? All those in, go ahead, Cornell.
I just want to offer, I know how difficult it has been with our small committee to wordsmith all of these. The idea of our committee doing this again and then passing it around to everybody else and getting all those edits and putting that together, it's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And I totally understand the points of we're not gonna, wordsmith it perfectly tonight. I don't know that we're gonna wordsmith it perfectly even a week or 2 weeks from now, because we all have other things to do in life. And so
yeah, we can do a process, right? And so I'll work with Michael, who's been kind of the lead for the committee. And what we can do, since I'm the one writing the report and doing the presentation, I'm going to get that started anyways. If you all in your committee want to take another stab at it, we can put some deadlines and then you send it to me. I send it out to everybody, and anybody who has recommendations or input can send it back to me. So it's not a bunch of reply alls. I'll capture it all because I'm going to be doing this work anyways. And then I'll send back out all of the suggestions and updates and anything anybody wanted to add through email. So that will cut down on email to you guys. We can definitely put that in place with just some deadlines about when to respond. Okay, any other discussion? All right, all those in favor with the motion to send back recommendation number 4 for a little bit more wordsmithing to the committee to be shared back out and updated for vote on May the 17th called meeting. All those in favor of that motion, please indicate so in the chat saying aye, in favor, yes, or indicating on your Zoom that you're in favor. Anyone opposed, say no, not in favor, nay in the chat. And any abstentions you can put in the chat as well. All right, in getting the votes, we have a couple of abstentions and one not in favor, the rest are in favor, so the motion passes. And so, Michael, I'll email you first and then we'll get some deadlines in place that will go out to the whole fuller committee, and that one will be tabled and we'll have that on the agenda for May the 17th. Thank you guys. Thank you. I have a lot of work to get started on, so that will be great. We have the other ones that have been approved. Dr. Monica Faulkner, in maybe like 2 or 3 minutes, can you give everyone a preview of what to expect from you coming up in your committee?
Yeah, so you kept saying May 17th was going to be a short meeting, but I don't know.
Maybe not.
Because this sex ed stuff is never short. So our committee has worked really hard this spring. I would encourage everybody to go and look at the SHAC website. On the district website, we have a page where we put all of our information, including a really long explanation of our process and where we're at. So that provides all the information that I don't need to read to you tonight. What I'm working on right now and what we're going to send out to you on Monday is a really thorough recommendation that includes the results of the community survey that we put out. We surveyed teachers, and then we have comments from people who reviewed the textbook. And so it looks like our recommendation is going to be for the textbook that the State Board of Education approved for sex ed in middle school. Yeah, so that's the quick kind of update of where we are at. I know people in the community have questions, and I think we are more than happy to answer those questions, especially if it kind of quells any kind of panic people have around talking about sex ed. So happy to answer those questions. And I think we've tried to be as transparent as we could possibly be. And I just want to thank Hillary, Kayla, Leslie, and Robin. We've pretty much been meeting weekly, and we've really stuck to this. And so it's been hard work, and they've done a great job.
You
So
guys
I'm
are
happy to
amazing.
answer any questions. I know people are tired though.
Yeah. Any questions for tonight? So I feel like we've got 3 big things that will be on our agenda for May 17th. It will be the recommendation number 4, fresh and newly worded. It will be the election of our officer positions, and it will be hearing from the human development and sexuality recommendations. And that's all that I have right now for us for May 17th. And
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's at 6. I just want to make sure it's on my
6.
calendar right. Okay.
Same time. Yep.
Yeah, I'll clear that up. Make sure we only have one
link.
Zoom link next time. Yeah.
And Ryan, we were still anticipating that now the SHAC recommendations and the presentation from the Human Development and Sexuality Committee will be tentatively on the June 16th board meeting. Is that where we're at right
Correct.
now? Okay.
Yep, let's do all of it in June.
All of it in June. All right. Anything else? Thank you so much for staying late, getting this done. Y'all are amazing. Thank you for all your hard work. See you on May 17th at 6. And we will stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
everybody.
You. Thank you.
Night.
Have a good night.